You know, I looked at this story all last night with Trump and his backtracking on draining the swamp, and I thought about covering it, but that's what the mainstream media does. And what I've always tried to do is look at the facts and what people say, and then make an educated statement about what that may portend for our future. Um, that's an interesting take on the Electoral College from Newt Gingrich, but that the man ever intended to do this thing called drain the swamp, you couldn't, even as the most diehard, ardent Trump supporter, believe that. Based on this man's history and based on where he comes from, he was one of the swamp monsters. He was one of the people that, when other people had said about getting the money out of Washington, he was like top 10 on the list. But we're not going to devote a whole bunch of time to that. But we are going to talk about the transition team today and some of these people in the swamp, and see if we can use Trump's own actions to make it jive up with his words, because that's what my channel has always been about, is going to the Constitution, seeing what it says, and putting my opinion to the side, only to the extent that it doesn't agree with what is written down and what people have said. So let's go through this list here. This is Donald Trump's transition team, as reported by NPR. We can go through this list, and there's a couple names that stick out: Andrew Bromberg and Ron Nichols, and we're going to cover them in a little bit more detail, but I'm just going to go through this list briefly just to show you all of the lobbyists that are on it, because I do remember him saying that that was going to be something he was going to avoid. Here's Ron Nichols. He's the guy, director, agency action. He's going to be the one in charge of all of the different department heads for transition. We're going to cover him in a minute. We're going to go down here. We'll start with DHS. Cindy Hayden, lobbyist for Altria, a giant tobacco company. Everybody knows about Rex Tillerson, and he's a big oil guy. Ron Burgess, that's a video in and of itself I could do. David Malpass, president of Encima Global, consulting and economic research firm. Previous positions include work at Bear Stearns as the chief economist. Once again, Steve Mnuchin, Secretary of the Treasury, Goldman Sachs banker. Steve Bannon, also former Goldman Sachs banker. Ken Blackwell. Now this is an interesting one, and this goes back to my original predictions. It was people like this, I never listed him by name, but let me share you a quote about what this man said about Donald Trump before he became president. Donald Trump is an existential threat to conservatism. He is arguably one of the most divisive figures in modern political history, and his candidacy represents not only a threat to the Republican Party. Donald Trump is dragging the nation into the political gutter. It is time for conservative voters to open their eyes and understand the nation deserves better than this political huckster. This is a Republican saying this. And of course now he's taking a position in the Trump administration in domestic issues, but this is what these people were saying. This is where I formulated my entire theory about the Electoral College. And maybe I gave too much credit to these people actually being willing to stand by their words and stand by their principle. Maybe that was my error. Maybe that's why the Electoral College didn't turn out the way that we had talked about, because these people who said one thing did another. Let's see here. Who we have? Mike McKenna, president of MWR Strategies, a lobbying firm. Labor, Steve Hart, chairman of Williams & Jensen, a Washington lobbying firm, named one of Washington's top lobbyists. Let's see who else we have here. Ado Machida. Ado Machida was a lobbyist under Dick Cheney. Andrew Bromberg. This is another one of the spooky people that I was going to cover earlier in the video. But you can go down this list, that NPR list, and you can just see one lobbyist after another. Trade reform. Jim Carter is a lobbyist for Emerson, a manufacturing company. VA reform. Bill Chatfield is a lobbyist who served as the director of selective service. And it just goes on and on. So you can do this for yourself. This is npr.org, from lobbyists to loyalists. That should get you there. But the two I wanted to talk about, we'll talk about Andrew Bromberg first. Andrew Bromberg is a guy who is on transitions team for health and human services, and that's an important thing to remember given what I'm going to explain about this man. He was a department manager for a company called MITRE, M-I-T-R-E, in Bedford, Massachusetts. Now that's kind of a very ubiquitous sounding name, but when we look into the history of MITRE, we find this. In 1982, the MITRE Corporation authored a proposal for the State Department called Cannabis Eradication in Foreign Western Nations. In this proposal, a plan was outlined to eradicate cannabis in participating nations within 128 days for 19 million. The report discussed the use and safety considerations of paraquat. That's a herbicide. The plan would have been to aerially dispense paraquat over marijuana crops. One safety concern was the food crops grown alongside the marijuana crops being contaminated. Now you can read the rest of this. This is just, you can just go MITRE on Wikipedia and you can read this. But paraquat is a very nasty chemical, and this guy was a department manager of a company that wanted to spray this over all of the Western Hemisphere to kill cannabis. This was what 1982 version of the war on drugs is. That's where this guy comes from. And if we look at paraquat, and you can go ahead and wiki that, P-A-R-A-Q-U-A-T, you can see that it has been linked to Parkinson's. And it is very toxic to humans. So, this is the guy that's going to be now slated to head up Health and Human Services in the Trump administration. That's not scary. All right, the guy who's in charge of all of his departments is a man named Ron Nichols. Now, if you read through Ron Nichols' bio, it doesn't seem like it's that big a deal, but he has this one little blurb about being a special advisor to a company called Tritium. This is Tritium. Now, we remember how all of the alt-right news organizations were talking about how Donald Trump was going to keep us out of globalism and keep us out of this world domination. Well, if you go read who this guy's man in charge, where he's from and what he does, this company Tritium, it's basically, well, I'll read what they say about themselves. Founded in 2013, Tritium Partners is a private equity firm focused on buyouts of growth companies in the lower middle market. And you can read this on Tritium on their own homepage. But if you go to the companies, these are all global companies and companies that are built around the idea of globalism. PayCommerce, Giact, Road One, Globe Access, and you can read all this for yourself. You have to excuse me this morning. I have something in my throat, but the point being, out of all of this, is that this man hasn't even been inaugurated yet, and he's already doing his own thing. Everything he's doing is directly in conflict with what he said he was going to do, which is the entire reason, if you've ever seen me do a rant on Donald Trump, it has been based on the fact that the man cannot be trusted to keep his word. I don't care what he says he's going to do. I don't care what he says his positions are or what his desires are. He said them all with one purpose: to get you to walk into a little booth, close a curtain, and push the little button by his name. Once you've done that, the contract from his end is over. He no longer has any kind of driving force behind your end of the contract to keep up with what he said. He can now do whatever he wants. And that's exactly what he's going to do. Whatever he wants, because that's what he's always done. This man has never been beholden to anybody. He's never had to answer to anybody. He's never been a servant to anybody. And then all of a sudden, at 70 years old, people think that this man is going to somehow just magically transform into a servant of the people. And I don't know how anybody in their right mind could think somebody at that age could do this. So, anyway, like I said, you folks can look this all up for yourself and see if anything that I'm saying is wrong. I've shown you all the places to go to. But once again, thank you for coming to the channel. Very much appreciate everything everybody does. We're starting to get fewer and fewer trolls attempting to get comments past the filter. So I think we have a good core group of people here that can maintain a healthy, decent conversation going forward. And I'm expecting probably in the next couple months we might get some former Trump supporters coming here now and wanting to join the conversation, realizing that they've been had. So we will invite that, definitely, as long as they can maintain civility and a sense of decency. So Have a great week, folks, and Merry Christmas.